Profiles and Issues is a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. It is a show that profiles people and issues that affect the church in the modern world. Your program host is Father James Korda.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Profiles and Issues. I'm Father Jim Korda. Our issue is death and dying. To help me profile this issue is Sr Pat Fesler. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Why are people afraid to die? Obviously, that's a loaded question, but we're afraid to die. Why?
What I hear so many people saying that they're afraid to die is because they don't know what it's going to be like. People will say to me, well, tell me what it's like. And I keep saying, I can't tell you what it's like. It's a mystery. None of us know exactly what it's like. But once a person is able to get to a certain point, especially if they have an illness, they get to a point that maybe they're not as afraid to die. I find spouses, especially after a person has died, will say to me, you know what? I'm not afraid to die anymore. I used to be afraid to die, but I know my husband's okay. And so I'm not afraid to die, but they're afraid of what it's going to be like. Where are they going?
It's almost like the unknown. If we know what's going on,
unknown.
It's not a problem. But if we don't know, it's an innate fear that we have. And I would imagine a lot of it depends too on a person's age. Someone who is older or that might be more ready as opposed to someone who's younger. In your experience, does that differ a lot?
Sometimes I think it does, unless a person that is young has been sick. I think if they've had some kind of an illness, especially an extenuating illness, then they are ready when the time comes. Older people very often will say, you know what, I'm really ready to go. I've lived a long life. I've done everything that I needed to do. And I always say, make sure you talk to the people that you need to talk to. Say the things that you want to say before you die. And I tell the families that. Make sure you say to a person that everything that you want to say, because that is so very important to say those things. Because if you don't, then you need to deal with that down the road. Because that's very hard for people that have a tragic death then.
And what about the person that dies suddenly? Like, how difficult is that for a family member or a spouse to have someone just, they're gone? There's no preparation, no anticipation. That's
a very difficult thing because you don't get to say goodbye. And what do I do now? Because here I am by myself. I have nothing prepared. I don't know how to do things. I wasn't able to ask them how to do things. How could they do this to me? And I think sometimes there's more anger when it comes to that. There's that unknown of how do I do what needs to be done? And my life has totally changed, and I don't know what this new normal means for me at this point in time in my life. And it is a new normal. It truly is.
And isn't that kind of the challenge with these issues of death and dying, that they're so much a part of our life, and yet they're issues that we tend to not listen to or not think about. Why is that?
I think people are beginning to more today think about them and listen to them. In the past, people didn't want to do that. There was a bigger fear of having to talk about dying. Today, I think when it comes to dying, it's very often it's the family that they might be worried about. I'll talk to you about dying, but I don't want my family to know that I might be dying or that I am dying. And then the family will say, he's dying or she's dying, but I don't want him to know that he's dying. Because if they know they're dying, then we have to talk to them, and I don't want to do that. And I keep saying, you all need to come together and talk together and be able to, you can't, you just can't protect each other, because everybody needs to be on the same page and be able to talk about that together, because it's a family thing. It's not just one person. You know, you're all going through this together.
No, there's that sense of denial. I would imagine on the part of someone who might be sick or terminal, that there's a denial that they're dying. But on the other hand, what about someone that is told or not told of their imminent death? How unfair is that?
I think it's very unfair if people are not told that they're dying. I am a very firm believer that if a person has any kind of a disease, a terminal disease or anything wrong with them, that they need to know what is wrong with them. That's one of the things I've always said to families. They need to know. They have a right to know because that's them. And if they don't know, how can they prepare? How can they deal? And how can you prepare? Are you going to put on a front and put this smiley face on and just go in there and be happy like nothing is wrong? But you can't do that. You can't do that forever. Everybody needs to be real.
And I would imagine every case is different. Every person's dying is unique. Mm-hmm. There might be certain tools that you use in pastoral care and pastoral work, but every case is different because there's different variables, different family, right, different statistics. Is there any one common thing that you have in mind when you talk to someone who's dying?
I think one of the common thing that I think of is that you need to take them where they're at, and you need to listen to them and be compassionate and gentle with them. Only they know what they want to share with a person, and if they're willing to open up and share their life story, to be able to make things easier for them, because very often there are things that they want to say to someone else because there may be things going on that have gone on in their life and that they were never able to get off their chest, you know. And so needing to do that, it's almost like this confession thing, this reconciliation. And I know when I worked at the hospital, I would say to people, I have heard so many people's, you know, what they needed to say. Many people had reconciled to me. And then you would ask someone to come in to be able to give them the sacrament, mm-hmm, of the sick, or not the sacrament of the sick, of reconciliation. But people need to be comfortable when they're talking about it, and they need to be comfortable with the person they're talking to.
Years ago, there was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that had this whole process, but that's not what people in your field utilize in dealing with the death and dying process. What are some of the tools in the process that a person goes through that's dying?
I think some of those tools with Kubler-Ross are used somewhat with death and with dying, but I think probably more after a person has died. You don't look at those kinds of tools. You look at, okay, what is my life going to be like now? And you look at your responses are not the same. You're not able to make decisions the way you did. And I think when a person is dying, they're thinking of other things instead of her stages. I'm thinking about this person that I'm leaving behind. I'm thinking about my children. What do I have to do for my children to make their life whatever it can be when I am no longer here? And I think we don't do the accepting, the bargaining, and all that. I think very often that was something that we looked at in the past, but I think we look at things in a very general terms and be able to look at what's real today.
I wonder in your experience and in your work with death and dying and bereavement, our whole life is a process of dying. You know, someone once said that the moment we begin to live, we begin to die. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the image of a burning candle. It keeps going down. How relevant is understanding that to the life of faith? That, you know, the moment we're born, we start the process of dying. And where does faith come in, and how do we wrestle with those issues?
I think people wrestle with those issues very much because they want to know, well, what's God going to do to me when I die? You know, nobody, I mean, is God going to do anything? And then you still hear people today saying, oh, but you're going to go to hell. And I always say to people, you know what? I truly believe our God is a forgiving God. And we have to have that faith to trust and to love God. And people can, I think very often when people are dying, so much changes in their life when it comes to their faith. They can reach out to that God who has loved them forever and be able to reach out to that God and feel that loving presence in a very different way. And to be able to not only feel that presence from God, but feel that presence from other people that have gone before them.
Now, we're coming down to the last few minutes of our first segment. What about those people who may not have the gift of faith? In your experience, do you ever come across people who actually don't believe in anything? What do they do? Where do they go to? And what comfort is given them?
You know, I think that's a very interesting question. I remember when I first started to work in the hospital, I saw a gentleman and he said to me, I'm an atheist, I have no faith whatsoever. And my thought was, do I risk saying to him what I truly, truly believe? I did. And I said to him, you know, I really think everybody down deep somewhere has some faith. You really think that? And so we talked about that a little bit. And so, but he said to me, you have to come and see me every day. And by the last day before he went home, when I went in to see him, he said to me, you're right. He said, I've thought about it a lot. He said, I've even prayed about it. And I've never done that before. And I think that even though people say they don't have any faith, somewhere deep inside people, they do. And if they allow themselves to stop and to think and to just be, they will feel that presence if they allow it to happen. And just like that gentleman did. And when people say to me when I do funerals, that person had no faith. But as you talk to families more, there's faith there that people thought was not faith.
We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but we're going to take a quick break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our show. We're talking with Sr Pat Fesler about the issue of death and dying. We ended up by talking about the whole element of faith. And faith, obviously, at least for us as believers, is crucial, is important. How is that faith exercised in our everyday life as we die to lots of other things? Not just physical death, but dying, for example, a divorce, a sickness, unemployment. There's so many ways in which we as individuals die daily, not physically. And how important is faith in that situation and in all those situations?
I think that faith is extremely important. I'm not sure always that people will grab onto that faith and be able to take that faith and go with that and to feel that presence inside of them. Because sometimes I think there can be anger if they were let go of a job. And so, oh, did God make that happen to me? Those kinds of things. And with divorce, my marriage ended. But why did your marriage end? You know, what happened? And try to reach out. I always say to people, you know, look at all of the factors, but also be able to go to God and ask God to help you through this point. You need to be able to not only rely on your faith, but you have to be able to rely on your friends and your family.
Why is it that when people are saddled with the reality of dying, God is the one that's always blamed? You know, why did God do this to me? Why do I have this illness? Why am I in this situation? Why is God the one who we blame?
Because they can't see God and touch God, I think, and people don't know what it's going to be like. I don't find people necessarily blaming God as much as in the past. I think people have a stronger faith to a certain extent. Older people, I don't think, blame God. Maybe if it's a tragic accident or something, I might have families come in and be angry at God. I had this little girl, these two little girls whose mom died very tragically. And they came into kids group one day, and I don't remember what I asked them, but their thing was, God has helped us, and they're 6 and 7. God has helped us to get to where we are today because having faith and having God to rely on can make you strong. And they're sitting there telling these little kids this, and I'm like, wow, coming from little, out of the mouths of babes, you know, trying to get us to look at our faith and how important that is, and that we don't need to be angry at God. And yes, some people are angry because they don't know what else to do, and they have to grab on to being angry at somebody. And that's why I think people do that.
Now, if someone says to you, you know, God is to blame, what can we say to somebody? Sometimes words are inadequate.
They are.
Sometimes it's just our presence, just our being there. Has that been your experience?
Yes, yes. Sometimes saying, you can't say anything very often. If it's somebody that I have gotten to know and have worked with for a period of time, I might ask them why they think, you know, why are you angry at God, or why are you blaming God? But sometimes just being able to listen, and once they're able to talk it out themselves after they've started on it, they'll be able to step back and look at things and think, am I really angry at God? I've worked through that, and so now maybe I can go back to church or go back to feeling something that is really inside of me that I know is there.
Now, when we talk about death and dying, sometimes those are not good issues. Those are like bad issues and tragic issues. Is there a good news in that issue of death and dying? And if so, where is it?
Where is the good news? I think the good news is knowing that you're not alone. I think for families find that they really don't walk those shoes alone, that there are other people that have walked with them and that have had other people die. I always say to people, your grief is unique. Every single person's grief is unique. And so we do that however we can do that. We have to work through that journey of grieving. And are there good ways? You know, it's different for everybody.
Obviously for us as Catholics, we ritualize the dying process with the sacraments. How important is the sacrament of anointing? And briefly explain that for those that are with us. In your experience, when someone receives that, how do they feel, or at least what have they shared with you about that ritual?
People very often find that ritual to be, make them feel good, make them feel comfortable, maybe feel more at peace. I always say to people, don't wait till right before you die to receive that sacrament of anointing, because it's very much for healing. And it could be healing of mind, body, and soul. And so that is a sacrament that you can receive at any time, not just at the time that you're dying. So receive it before. And how do you feel? And so many people will say, I feel a sense of peace because there's something that has come over me that I didn't feel before. And it's a calmness because I know that I'm not alone in this process.
Now, in my experience of many people, I've had people say that are dying, I saw somebody, or I saw Jesus, or I saw my mother or father. How common is that among people that are in the process of dying? And how real is that, if we could say that?
I think it's very common. I think there's a lot of people that will reach out to someone. They think that there is someone there grabbing their hand. And that's what I always say to them. There is someone reaching for your hand, whether it be a loved one that has gone before you, whether it is your God, whoever that God is for you, or whatever, reach for that. Some people will say, it's an angel. There's an angel there reaching out. And I keep saying, maybe that's your angel, waiting to take you home to God. And who will meet you there when you go home to God? And people are not afraid of that because they feel that, and you see their eyes get really big. It's like you know that they have seen someone, something, and it makes them, it's almost like they just breathe this sigh of relief that things are, wow, things are really okay.
There was a poem once I remember hearing, and one of the lines of the poem said that, of the dying person, that she turned away and saw what we couldn't see. And so there's that whole sense that, you know, in this dying process, maybe the grace of God is giving that person the acceptance, that it's okay, that there's something beyond this life. And how important for people in general is it for us to have some hope in an everlasting life, in something beyond this world?
And I think very often people do have that hope for something beyond this world. They don't know what it is. People want to know what it is. And again, that's the mystery of it. We don't know what it is. But I think when a family has seen their loved one reach out for someone's hand, see their loved one stare at someone, and know, or listen to their loved one speaking to someone, to their mother or their father, it's almost as if there is something more. And it's a confirmation sometimes for people to know, wow, you know what? That person came to take them home. And you know what? I need to trust that inside.
We're down to the last couple minutes of our time together. What has been some of the most difficult issues that you've had to deal with this whole issue of death and dying in your experience?
I think some of the most difficult issues I have found is if someone has committed suicide, to have to deal with that family, especially with young children. Families want to run. Sometimes families don't know what to do, and so they don't want to be able to talk about it, not dealing with your grief. I keep saying to people, if you don't deal with it, it will come knocking at your door someday, and it will hit you in the head, and you have to deal with it. Because people are afraid to look inside themselves and look at, what do I need to deal with? How do I do this? Because I don't want to do it. It's scary. And dealing with grief is very hard because it's emotional, and we do cry, and you might get upset, but you know what? That's all okay because it's part of the healing process. And the way you feel today, I always say to a person, is not the way you're going to feel. I don't say that initially, but they will say to me, how long am I going to feel this way? And I will say, you aren't going to feel this way forever. You know, you'll be able to say to me down the road, I don't feel this way anymore. I have a lady that it'll be 10 years that her daughter died. And she said, I still cry, but after my tears, there is such a sense of peace that I know everything is really okay with her.
There's almost that sense that you never forget it, but
Right.
you learn to live with it. And life doesn't stop for you, it moves on, because obviously the person that passes would not want that loved one left behind to stop living.
Right. It's like I always say to people, Doug Manning talks about when we have a surgery or we've had to get stitches or whatever and we have a scar. That scar will always be there. It's not going to be a gaping wound that is there, but the scar will always be there. And so you can't rub that scar away. And you want it to be there because you'll think back and you don't want to forget that person. You will never forget that person because that person was part of your life.
Just one brief comment that you'd like to make to those folks that are with us that might be experiencing dying themselves or the dying of a loved one.
Don't be afraid to talk about it. There is a wonderful book out by Joyce Rupp and Joyce, I can't think of her last name, but it's Joyce Rupp, and it's May I Walk You Home, and it is one of the best books on being able to die peacefully, die gently, and the prayers that go with it. And it's not only for a family, but it's for the person themselves. And I always say, don't be afraid to say anything you want to say. Be open to your family. Be honest with your family. And families need to be very open and honest with their loved one who is dying. Say everything you want to say. Spend all the time. Live quality time. Don't miss something that you want to do.
Sister Pat Fesler, thank you very much for being with us on our show today.
Thank you very much. It was good to be here.
And thank you for being with us. Have a good day, and God be with you.
Profiles and Issues was a production of CTNY, the Catholic Television Network of Youngstown. Your program host was Father James Korda.